Economic Development Commission is convening by video conference pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. This meeting is being recorded. Please be aware that other people may be able to see you, and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all phones and devices. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. This is in the nature of a workshop meeting for the commissioners. That is my intention, at least as the chair. And we'll go through the roll call. Seth Engelborg.
Here.
Wendy Hudson.
Here.
Nat Lowell.
Here.
Barry Rector.
Present.
Joe Topham.
Present.
I see Christy Frantella just joining us. Christy, are you on?
Yes.
Great. And we'll announce other members as they come in. I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Commission. Staff, please respond when in the affirmative. Leslie Snell, Planning Director.
Here.
Megan Trudell, Senior Planner.
Here.
Mike Burns, Transportation Program Manager.
Here.
Okay, and that is everybody I see with us at the moment. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda or any discussion thereof?
So moved.
Second. Thank you, Barry, for seconding. Roll call vote. Seth Engelborg.
Aye.
Christy Frantella.
Aye.
Wendy Hudson.
Aye.
Nat Lowell.
Aye.
Barry Rector.
Aye.
Joe Topham.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. So undergoing discussion of our enabling legislation, specifically the membership, discussion of suggestions received from the commissioners for an updated MP&EDC roster. Thank you everyone for sending your suggestions to Leslie, and staff was able to compile a spreadsheet. Leslie, I know that there were some corrections that needed to be made to that spreadsheet. Do you have the updated version available for the screen?
We did not have time to put together an updated version. We were sort of short on turnaround time last week, and people were out yesterday. So we have the sheet that we distributed to everyone, and the only correction that I received was from you, Mary. And you did submit to us sort of a summary sheet last night that we have available to put up. And Barry Rector also worked on a different version of the spreadsheet that's also really helpful, that I think might be better to work from than the one that staff put together. But I think the two that you all submitted last night and this morning are both really helpful.
Okay.
Discussion.
So do any of the commissioners have a starting point? I just want to make sure that we don't jump straight into something if somebody else has a point that they want to make at the beginning. We're just checking in with everyone. Do we want to put, yes, I'm sorry, Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just hoping that we could set sort of like the ground rules of what we are hoping to accomplish today. Are we hoping to, get to an end outcome with a vote on the exact membership, or are we hoping to get a proposal in place for future vote, or what are we exactly trying to do here?
That's a great question, Seth. I would say that ideally we would come out of this meeting with a defined roster, but there are some elements to that, and perhaps we need to discuss what those elements are. And of course, it will depend on the direction of the discussion whether or not we're able to accomplish that. I want to pause and note that Dave Iverson joined us, 4:05. Welcome, Dave.
Apologies for my tardiness.
Barry, you also, I think, had a hand up.
That was my same question.
Okay.
That Seth brought up, is we need to really kind of discuss and hammer out what the process is to get to the end goal of this.
Okay. So from my point of view, there are sort of three elements to this membership list. One is a definition of what each seat represents. The second is a definition of how that seat is elected, or how the representative who occupies that seat is selected. And the third would be, I guess, who does the selection. So for instance, just as an example, the county commissioners, send a representative to the NP and EDC, as opposed to right now, an at-large member is selected from a pool that's advertised in the paper. So those mechanisms and that appointing authority are part of the membership list. I'm not sure that we'll get to all three parts for all the proposed seats tonight. It would be great if we did. Seth, is that helpful?
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
Barry, anything you want to add to that?
I think we definitely need to kind of break this into phases, though, as opposed to just trying to accomplish things in one fell swoop. So I think it's best just to kind of go through it, take a look at one aspect of it, close it, make sure that we're comfortable with it, and then begin to make determinations about how do we deal with that for each individual area that we're going to want to try to work on. And, in that process, we'll also come up with how many people are going to, how many is going to be the composition of the board.
Yeah, I would say that we would start by looking at what do the seats represent. And the other two details are entirely dependent on what the seats represent. So I think we need to start there. And any further comments from commissioners on how to get started here?
I think Leslie's got her hand raised there. Right
Leslie, are you?
I think it might be a good starting point to show the spreadsheet that Barry worked on, because it separates the options by sector, because you all had a lot of discussion about should it be sector or should it be individual agencies. You talked about which agencies fall into each sector. And it was a little difficult to try to take your responses, which were all formatted a little bit differently, and put them together into a comprehensive document that really clearly indicated the direction. And I think this one shows, the sectors with subcategories. It attempted to try to illustrate who voted for which one, and then the total votes. So I think the total votes would give us a good direction for, the agencies or the sectors that you as a group were most interested in moving forward with. And I think it would really help narrow it down.
Thank you. I agree, Leslie. I think Barry and I were thinking along similar lines. His spreadsheet provides more detail. I tried to condense it down into a very readable form, but I think having the extra detail is valuable. I have two requests. First, for commissioners, would you look at your column and just make sure that what's represented on the spreadsheet represents your submissions? And for whoever's controlling the spreadsheet, would you highlight column A, which has the names of the seats, and make the font larger? Because I don't know about anybody else, but I'm having a very hard time reading that.
Can we quickly share this or no?
There we go. Yes, can that be emailed to commissioners?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you, Megan. All right, is everybody comfortable with the way this is displayed on the screen at the moment? I appreciate the larger font. That I find that very helpful. I know that we have lost a little information down at the bottom by making those bigger. So we'll just have to remember to scroll. Okay, do any commissioners have edits to what is in their column? Just want to double check, and I don't know if we'll find any or not. But if anybody does see anything, by all means, send that note out. And if any of the commissioners join us, Megan, would you give me a heads up on that? Because I'm not really able to have the participant list up on the screen while we're looking at the spreadsheet.
Mhm.
And Madam Chair, Dawn Holgate did reach out to me and said that she would be a little bit late for the meeting tonight.
Thank you, Leslie. Okay, Barry, why don't you describe your organization of the material on the spreadsheet for us?
All right. So a few things started to pop out here. When we look at this, I know there's a great want to put sectors in here, so that's where it started. Some people went as far as to identify a particular entity out there that would fall under that sector. So that's why, again, I tried to take the effort to group them in. And I want to kind of circle back to the sectors in a few minutes. Sometimes when we were dealing with sectors, I found the responses a little difficult to encode, because at times it was like, well, I want that sector, and then I want an at-large from this agency, an at-large from that agency. I want that, 3 particular parts from that from that type of thing, like in the business sector. I mean, I'm not trying to pick on people here, but it really was a little bit of a challenge to try to pull it together. So this is, again, best attempt to try to deal with this.
Right, Barry, excuse me for interrupting. I'm sorry, Barry. That's why I wanted the commissioners to review what is in their columns, because this is
right.
a translation, and I fully recognize that. I face the same difficulties trying to look at things. But yes, thank you for putting this together, and I'm sure it was with best intent to try and represent what everybody was asking for.
Yeah, I think I'm inclined to agree with you, Madam Chair, that the best thing to do here at this point is make sure everyone says their data is solid, and now make any corrections that need to be done.
Yeah.
And that
we have a hand up from Christy. Christy, did you have a correction?
Yes, just under my name, it says there is no at-large, and I did have a few there, and then I think something was put under renewable that I did not have on my list.
Oh, hang on. All right, so
Megan, maybe you can look at Christie's email and fix whatever probably just a 1 in the wrong box or something like that.
that could have,
It looks like maybe 2 renewable at-larges were listed instead of just 2 generalized at-larges.
there we go.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep.
And Seth, do you have a correction?
Not a correction, but I'd like to identify 2 possible sources of bias. I know the process isn't perfect, but one is that some members voted more times than other members because they wanted a larger board. So for instance, I wanted a 15-member board. I'm not sure however many other people wanted. Some people might have only wanted, let's say, a 7-member board. So I voted twice as many times as that person. And then the second thing is, if you look at the shaded gray lines that are like the sector total, if we just looked at that and said in almost every category, people voted more for the sector generally than for the specific organizations. Well, that's true, but that doesn't mean that this necessarily wanted the sector. It just means that it's easier to vote for a category than it is to vote for an individual organization. So I know we have a process and it's not perfect, but I just did want to point those 2 things out.
Thank you, Seth. I think those issues might get worked out in the conversation.
Mhm.
Certainly want everybody to feel free to either clarify their intent or to even to change your mind when you look at the whole screen and say, well, I thought this, but now I'm thinking that instead. You certainly have that ability. As for the number, so the far right column, the total votes, I found that column less helpful. So I don't know how much time we need to spend there or how we want to interpret that. Because I saw that it was skewed. If you voted for 2 seats in one category, then that was counting up more votes. Barry, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I do actually. The places where it's going to look a little skewed is where we get into where the category of general public and then at large. There was no clear way if you had said 2 people, 3 people, 5 people, whatever, when we got to the total vote. So that and the planning board was slightly imperfect, but the majority of what you see here for total votes is pretty straightforward for just about everything else. You know, with the planning board, I could have listed planning board 5 times and then see where that worked out, but I thought that was a little counterproductive. So really, if you were to say anything was skewed, I'd just say in those 2 categories, the at-large through the general public, and then the planning board. But I think if we tackle those individually, we should be able to make some sense out of that. And I just want to call your attention to one other thing. Can you scroll down the bottom, please? So what you got was in those columns marked actual, recommended, indifference, trying to encode some of the responses in there. People told us how many they thought would be a good composition for the board. There were times, though, in interpreting the information back where people went a little over. They may have miscounted. It would maybe have been a little difficult to figure out what that coding was. So there were, but out of the majority, again, there were only 3 that came up with a little bit of an overage, which I think we can resolve tonight. The last thing I want to call your attention to that I put in here, and this, I'm sorry, this is kind of my own doing, was I was thinking about, as we're composing the board, who else can be filling in, and I realized that when it came to either energy or transportation, we've got 2 staff members who deal with almost an incredibly large gamut of things. If we were to utilize those in a non-voting capacity, you can actually start thinking about maybe reducing your membership down, and that's another conversation to have.
Barry, I would say that is a different conversation and one I'd like to save until we get through the membership.
Right, but what I'm saying to you is that those numbers, okay, at least from what I was trying to supply to you, and maybe just do a little foreshadowing, was meant to think about, is there an alternative above and beyond, so that, like Mike Burns, who's our transportation planner, who we rely on religiously to do things, he actually may resolve the entire transportation sector in one fell swoop.
Barry, I think we're getting a little ahead, Barry. So please save
all right,
that.
so I'm sorry.
I think it's a good point, but please save that for later.
But I just want to be crystal and clear about why that's on there, because it can potentially affect the rest of the sheet as time moves along. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Christy, your hand is still up. Do you have another comment?
No.
Okay. All right, so any other commissioners with edits to what is in their column? Christy, your hand is still up. I don't know if you can lower it just for my convenience. Thank you. It's up again. There we go. All right, so one thing I thought we might choose as a starting point is the planning board seats. We seemed to have not a consensus, but a coalescing around the idea of 3 planning board seats, potentially with the other 2 serving as alternates. But I wonder if is 3 planning board seats something that we can generally agree on to begin building the membership? Do we want to discuss that? And can we scroll up on the spreadsheet till we get, or sorry, might not be up. It's in the middle, sorry. Yeah, that's great, thank you. So here, Barry, I'm sorry, I cannot tell the difference between the numbers on that if those all are 3s. You know? To me, they're just little dots.
Okay, so I can read it. There you go. Thank you.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, so we did have some different suggestions, but a preponderance of 3. And so for discussion, do we feel as commissioners that 3 is the right number of planning board seats on the NP and EDC for the future? Wendy?
I guess I just would like to hear Barry's why he's thinking 1. I just would love to hear your thoughts, Barry. You're so
Thank you.
close.
If I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, and then we'll go to Joe afterward.
All right. All right. So I did that because I really want to go, and I'm glad the bottom of the sheet is up there where you see the actual recommended indifference. I think as we're beginning to figure out how many seats we're doing, that was a part of the equation. Because the more seats that you have, in my opinion, the tougher it is to fill a quorum requirement in order to get things done. So, for instance, with 11 right now, our quorum is 6. When it goes to 13, now you've got to rely upon 7 people to be there, or you have to cancel the meeting. If 15, we're now at a grand total of 8 seats that you have to fill before you can do it. My experience has been that the more seats that you add in, the probability goes higher that you're not always going to have successful meetings based upon lack of a quorum. So, with that in mind, that's why I chose 1 planning board person, because as we move, if you're going to do 1 or you're going to do 5, that's pretty self-explanatory. But in terms of if you're doing 3, how does 3 get selected in that process? And that is not, I don't think that's the conversation for now, but I would like to have that conversation later. But that's how I got to the 1. I was trying to begin to figure out, how do I make the commission functional in terms of meeting quorum requirements for things. And again, I know you don't want me to necessarily mention it, but that's why I did the ex officio things as well, because they were going to achieve objectives in here without counting toward quorum. Does that help, Wendy, to kind of understand?
Wendy?
Thanks, Madam Chair, through you to Barry. I guess I see it. It did surprise me a lot. I think, in defense of the planning board, I think the planning board members are probably, there's a few of us that are extremely reliable. I think most of us are in this current iteration. I remember from the past, maybe not as much. I guess I would also say lack of attendance that's another issue and should be maybe carefully considered. I like a bigger board with great attendance, so we get more voices. I think maybe non-attendance can be more disciplined, or, people should take these seats very seriously. So I guess I don't want to compose the board simply to meet a quorum or worry about that we won't. I think we've had quorums for a good number of years now. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm going to offer another way of looking at the size of the board and the quorum requirement, just for getting the whole 360 view of that. The larger the board, the more people can miss the meeting and you still make a quorum. So to use Barry's math, with an 11-member board, you can lose 5 and still have a quorum. With a 13-member board, you lose 6 and still have a quorum. With a 15-member board, you can lose 7 and still have a quorum. So I look at it, I agree completely with Wendy that attendance should be something that is, not quite sacred, but, everybody has things going on in their lives, but it's a commitment that people should be making consciously when they accept a seat on the commission. And, the issue of getting a quorum works both ways. More people can miss and you still have a quorum when you have a larger board. So that's looking at it from both sides. Let's go to Joe. Joe, I'm assuming you're making a comment on the planning board?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I had 5, but if you look in my chart, I had 2 alternates. So I'm fine with going to 3. I think that's wise, but I do like your recommendation as well in your letter where you said with 2 planning board members participating in as an alternate and a non-voting capacity. I think that we all would like to stay involved in this as much as possible. So I'm fine even if I'm an alternate, but I would really like to be attending these meetings. I think they're extremely important. I take the attendance extremely seriously and would not want to miss, too many meetings, if any meetings. So that's I at this moment, if I would change my vote to 5 to 3, that's fine. I would do that right now. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Joe. Other comments from commissioners before we go back to Barry on this topic? Barry, I think I saw you waving at me. That's why I'm saying we'll go back to you.
No, I mean, again, this was just part of the exercise. I'm perfectly content with 3, and we're going to have to. I think the idea of dealing with alternates has to become a separate conversation beyond this as we begin to develop it. But I'd probably just say let's try to steer away from alternates at the moment while we're doing this exercise and bring it in at a different phase, not right at this moment. That's all.
Right. No, I agree. We'll stick with the core membership, and then we can explore some of the other options. So it's Leslie?
Oh, I think it just zoomed my screen. Yeah, I think 3 is a really good starting point. You all seem to have general consensus on that. And I would suggest that you start there. And if, as the conversation progresses, you want to maybe, reduce that to 2 to add a seat for a different agency, or increase it to 4, you can have that conversation. But I think starting with 3 and moving on to the next group is a great way to get started tonight.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. It looks like we're putting a decision column in, so that's wonderful. Thank you. We'll be able to keep track on the screen. I thought we'd go next to the county commissioner seat that we have currently. I'm not sure where that is on the spreadsheet. Looks like it might be up further. So I guess it's called County Affairs here. That again seemed to have a general agreement.
Yep.
So we had one person who chose select board rather than county commissioners. Wendy, did you have a particular reason for that?
Thank you. No, just the way I wrote it.
Okay, so it's all the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
All right, so any further discussion on in keeping the county commissioner seat on the NPNEDC? Seth, I think that was one that you did not select. If you have any comment.
I'm not against having it. I mean, I think it makes sense that a regional planning authority needs to liaise with the county and the municipalities that they serve. It just isn't as high priority for me, since I feel like the uniqueness of Nantucket means that everything is going to be talked about among the same people anyways at some point. So that's why I didn't add it, but I'm not against having it for sure.
Okay. All right, so it sounds like we generally agree that one seat for the county commissioners is something that we want to keep on the NPNEDC. Moving on to housing, again, a lot of agreement overall that was a sector, if you will, that was that should be represented. So looking at it just from the sector level, I don't think there was anybody that did not indicate housing. So there was that. So not everybody indicated a particular organization for housing. So this is where we start to get into some of the details for these seats. Currently, we have the Housing Authority represented with a seat on NPNEDC, and then we have a representative on the Affordable Housing Trust. Is that right, Leslie? I'm sorry. It's hard to keep all of them straight. So both of those organizations right now are connected to the NPNEDC, and then Housing Nantucket is a private nonprofit, if I'm remembering that correctly. Is there any thought or conversation on assuming that we're keeping a housing seat, on how that seat would be filled? Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not specifically, but I think it might be fruitful to go through all of the sectors and say, okay, we definitely want someone for housing. We definitely want someone for these other ones that are shared highly, like environmental conservation, and narrow down the sectors first, and then go back to how we're selecting seats from that sector, because we'll have sort of like a better assessment of numbers at that point. So that's just my opinion, my desired strategy, but I'll defer to how you want to run the meeting.
Thank you, Seth. Nat, are you speaking about housing?
Yeah, just a kind of a clarification, and I just want to thank Barry and everyone involved in this chart. It is helpful. There are a couple of slight errors, but this one here, when I sent my thing, and I meant, I think it was Dave that said this at the previous meeting. I'm in favor of leaving the housing authority, the state agency. It's been part of it for years, but I think it was Dave that said this, but correct me if I'm wrong. It might have been somebody else. If the housing authority, let's say at some point, wanted to select someone else from another housing entity, that's kind of what I was leading to. That's been brought up before, where they would be they would do that, make that choice on their own for each year. If there was somebody that wanted to do it that wasn't on the housing authority, they would pick that person. That was my suggestion.
Thank you, Nat.
Sorry about the confusion with that.
I had a similar approach in my submission, which was to say that the housing authority would be the appointment maker for the housing sector seat.
Yes.
And so let's bring that into the
I like that, Mary. You said it better than I did.
Well, thank you, Nat. So as a concept, the idea of broadening the membership of a seat, but retaining a specific entity as the appointing authority for that seat.
Correct.
It comments on that. And I'm sorry, I need you to use the raise hand feature because I cannot keep everybody on the screen and still look at the spreadsheet. Barry?
Yeah, I actually like that, because I think when we were looking at sectors here, it was left kind of amorphous about, and there's certain follies with just sticking within a sector. And it's good for just general conversation to see where we're going, but I think the most important thing is within a sector is to be able to identify an agency of some type under which to kind of govern that process. So I think the housing authority is a great idea. And when we get to process about how that happens, which will be a little further down the road, then I think we can begin to flesh out what that looks like with the missive that they'll operate under that we'd like to see. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think we're all saying the same thing, is that so from, it sounds like from the housing perspective, we're comfortable with retaining the housing authority as the entity that selects the person for the seat, and broadening the definition of the seat. Or the eligibility for it. Barry, and then we'll go.
Yeah, Madam Chair, can we just move that in the 12 in that summation? Can we just move that down into where we're doing the rest of it, instead of going on authority and all that stuff? Like, can we just put a 1 in the housing authority and then begin to define the dynamic later?
Yes, I'm fine from treating the spreadsheet that way. Yes.
I think
it's going to get a little messy if we're trying to annotate it with.
Right. So just who's ever controlling the spreadsheet, get rid of one housing, 12-5-23, and move it to housing authority.
Down a row.
There we go.
Great.
There we go.
Thank you, Barry. And I think
Thank
Megan,
you.
the magic behind the screen. Leslie,
Okay.
comment?
Well, maybe I was jumping ahead, but it sounds like the direction that you're going is the housing authority or their designee.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, I think you could say it that way. Yeah. And that's very concise. Thank you, Leslie. Okay. We also had broad interest in the business sector. So let's take a look at that one. Is that further up on the screen?
Sorry, just for the record, John has joined us.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, I think everybody, Joe, I think you had the business sector as one of your alternates if you were reducing the planning board. Am I right on that?
Yes, Madam Chair.
So considering that, I think everybody had an interest in a representative from the business sector. We had a couple of different options presented to us in that regard. Do we want to get into discussion of those options at this time, or do we want to move that to later in the meeting and simply agree on a business sector seat? Okay, I'm not seeing hands go up that they are screaming to discuss this. Wendy?
Yeah, I was I kind of love your suggestion there, Nat. I mean, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Nat. I do think that this is an economic development commission, and we've gotten flack in the past from, you know, I'm not seriously thinking that we should add every one of those things, but I kind of would love somewhere in the town for those voices to be a little bit more coalesced. So I guess I'm wondering, because I think the Chamber of Commerce tries to represent a lot of certainly businesses. There's no retailers association anymore really that's active. There's no restaurant association anymore that's super active. So there's a little bit of a gap, I think, from, you know, certainly getting information out or like getting the thoughts or saying like what the business trends are, what's the, you know, how did Stroll Weekend go? Like it'd be nice to have that stuff really quickly. And so I don't know that that's where that this organization should be that, but and the chamber is sort of a membership organization, so it's not quite right either. But I think there's something here we need to work on for the future, whether it's, you know, I think maybe not in this structure. So, but I'm glad that you had those all listed there, Nat.
All right, we'll go to Nat.
Madam Chair, sorry about that. So I'm going to lower my hand. This, again, the way I submitted it to Leslie made it look like I wanted like 25 members on the on the MPDC. That's not what I really meant. I was given these choices. I'm sorry about that. But the reason I wrote in town, Wendy, is because, you know, you're right. You've been around a while. We got a lot of flack for economic development. We don't need any. We're all set. Well, I used to think that, and I still do. But with the last 3 years, with the short-term rentals and all these other little things that have come up, I really believe that we're in a different place than we were then. And as far as a voice and these businesses in town get sort of taken for granted. And we just had a really good stroll, and it kind of reminded me of, you know, pre-COVID, and things are back to somewhat normal now and all that. And I just think that it's important that it isn't about economic development making more business. It's about recognizing it and explaining it and knowing the details, and people that are in the business that can explain some of this stuff to people that don't understand how everything stitches together here. that was my reason for making that list that way. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nat. We'll go to Barry. Leslie, I'm going to save you for last.
Thanks. I was rather hoping that maybe at this juncture, the four people who just checked off the business could maybe help dial us in a little further as to what would be a good entity under which to establish that. I will say right now that our main part of our mission is not necessarily just Nantucket. It's looking at how these organizations would interface on a regional basis as well, too. That's why I chose the chamber, because at least in my mind's eye, they're focused on a bigger level than just what's going on in Nantucket. And I thought that was a really important thing, given our scope and mission of what we do. I wanted to steer away from individuals as well, because if there's a problem with an individual, you've got a very much more detailed process to have to go through, and a lengthy process in my mind's eye, to have to get a new person on board. Whereas if you're dealing with an entity like a chamber, an association, a council, it's a lot easier to turn back to them and identify if you're having problems, what those problems are, and how do we address that. And the other thing too is, as the continuity isn't passing from one individual to a next, if you were just selecting individuals to represent, and in the chamber, it would be no more than, as they're making their report, everyone who's there at that table is going to be hearing the same thing at the same time. So that's why I was hoping to try to get further out from sectors and more into concrete organizations that we could turn to in terms of what that representation is for those reasons. Does that help clarify that a bit?
Thank you, Barry. Wendy has her hand up, and she is one of the one that just had a general business sector indicated. So Wendy, if in addition to whatever other comments you have, if you want to address Barry's question.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's interesting because when I was thinking Chamber of Commerce, I was thinking chamber staff and like a role from that. It's funny. I don't know why my mind jumped to that, but I like this idea of the nominating organization. So somebody from the chamber board, which is a nice large board. I think we should talk about the terms too, because I can envision a thing like, who wants to be the chambers person this year? And that's sort of good, because then we could get variety, but also, as we've talked about, the continuity factor. I don't know, like, is it a 1-year term? Is it a 2? Is it, but I think the chamber would be the right place for that, most likely, as long as it's nominated. I wanted to point out 2 things. Downtown business, I think, is really important, and independent business is important year round. Like, even though we have this robust economy, and thriving restaurants, this, that, and the other. I mean, I think this will be the deadest year of town pretty much ever. Everything's closing now. So I'm sorry to paint too broad a brush, and huge praise to everybody who stays open. But I think what we could try to work on more is, how do we make a more year-round economy so that all of us, can enjoy this place more than just part-time. Sorry, I talked too long.
So Wendy, just for clarification, you were speaking generally, not specifically about a representative on the seat being a member of the year-round business community, or?
I just think there is work for us to do, sort of to Nat's point, that that people criticize us for encouraging business, but we want to shape that type of business. I'm sorry, I wasn't more clear. We want to encourage local business. We want to encourage independent. We want to stretch our season and make it sustainable. Those are goals that are really worthy. It's not just driving more traffic to the island, or those sorts of, that way to think. Also, I guess one more quick point to let you all know is, I am on the executive of the Retailers Association of Massachusetts. So we do, I do have a foot in the door at the state level for what's going on in retail. Just FYI.
Thank you, Wendy. We'll go to Seth, who also had the general business category.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to look back to what we did with housing. And I think the designee model there with the housing authority is great because we have a a public commission that is, it's an inherently public process where they're going to be essentially given the authority to nominate on our behalf. But if you look at the organizations that are listed in business, we have, some sort of like trade organizations and others that might be nonprofits or might be business entities themselves. And so those are inherently not a public process. And I think if we are really concerned about equity of, making sure that the membership isn't driven by any particular interests, not that I think it is right now, but we want to make sure that the members are selected in a way that is a public process that's suitable for a government commission. And if we just say Chamber of Commerce can nominate whoever they want, I don't think that's a good practice. I think in general, the Chamber of Commerce represents a lot of interest for an Nantucket business and also for businesses off island that have commerce dealings with Nantucket. But in this category, I would prefer that it be really at that sector-based model where people are applying, and then the NP and EDC, which is inherently by definition the government committee that controls economic development, is selecting that representative. So I think that the designee model might work for many things here, but it doesn't work for business, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just note, we don't control economic development.
Sorry, control is not the right word, but we are the
We're
we are
invested
the
in it.
government entity that is tasked more than any other entity within the town, county, or region with making sure that economic development happens and is being planned appropriately. So, there's no other board that does that. Thank you.
I do want to interject and offer that there is a model in existence for a private organization putting their own representative on a public board. That is the case with the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, where the Nantucket Conservation Foundation has a seat on that committee. So just to say that, that appears to be an option. I appreciate Seth pointing out, of the need for public process, or the preference, I should say, perhaps. But it has been done elsewhere that a private organization has appointed a committee member.
Can I just quickly respond? Yeah, so I agree. So if we chose like the Chamber of Commerce to have a standing designee that was one of their staff, could be fine. But what I'm saying is would be a difference is if we delegated to the Chamber of Commerce to select anybody from the business community. I see that as being different. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying, Seth. I just had a thought, and what did I do with it? I just want to remind us at this moment that we haven't really asked any of the entities that we're discussing whether they're interested and willing in participating in this process. So that will have to happen. But for tonight, let's just imagine that they're willing and able, so that we don't get too lost in that discussion. Thank you. Okay, Leslie, yours is the last hand up. So we'll go to you.
All right. Well, put my hand down first of all. I just want to remind the commission members of our long-standing relationship with the Chamber of Commerce. And I've been your representative on the Chamber of Commerce for 12 years. So, maybe it's a good time to consider that the reverse might be better, to have a representative from the Chamber on the Planning Commission. I know that there was a lot of talk about them being a private member-driven group, but in fact, in addition to that, they're one of, I think it's 14, I should know, because I used to be the president, but I've forgotten, one of 14 regional tourism councils that are funded by the state through the Mass Office of Travel and Tourism. So there is a government relationship there. They're not just a private chamber of commerce. And, throughout our long history with them, we've sponsored different business-related workshops with them through the SCORE program, through the Small Business Association. There's a group called SEED, the Southeastern Economic Development Corporation, that provides, funding to small businesses. So we've done a lot with them over the years. And during COVID, your staff worked very closely on, business-related impacts that were caused by COVID. So I just wanted to remind the board of that, maybe having the chamber in the reverse relationship to what we have now is something to consider.
Thank you, Leslie. And that was one of the questions that I posed at the beginning of the membership discussion, was whether it's appropriate to have a sector or an entity represented on NP and EDC, or whether it should be the reverse, whether NP and EDC could request to be represented in that other entity or committee or whatever that might be. So it's something we can keep in mind, particularly if we get to the end and we're torn about a particular category, bumping up against a too high membership or something like that. So that is another way of going. Barry, on the business, is there more to say here? Because I'd like to wrap this up and move on.
Yeah, I understand. Just real quickly, I just want to remind the board as we're going through this exercise that we have no regulatory authority. We're advisory. So even our best plans have to be executed by someone else in that sense. We can come up with it, but again, someone else is going to be dealing with that process. And, sometimes that's where our frustration lies at. We've come up with the best plan and all of a sudden it just doesn't fly in any way, shape, or form. And again, I think as much as we're dealing with this, I want to remind people that I think a good part of our focus has to be on regional interactivity and how that works. I don't want, personally, I don't think it's a good idea for us to be getting involved with things that are already being handled by other agencies about how the island is being run on a local level. So that's why I've been trying to, at least with some of the decisions I put down here, is look at who's got that broader scope of being able to make those things happen and not try to, focus on entities that are already doing a really good job of dealing with us on that local level. So thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Are we comfortable with putting a 1 on the row for Chamber of Commerce to represent the business sector, acknowledging that there are some details to be worked out about exactly how that seat would be filled? Anybody not comfortable with that? Now's the time to say so. All right, so for our working draft, let's put the 1 on that.
Yep.
And let's go to the, I think it's environmental conservation section. Also had widespread support. And again, so we have some things going on here. We currently have a seat for the Conservation Commission. We did receive input from the Conservation Commission. There's an email in the packet about that. We have talked for a very long time about including the land bank, and they have said that they are interested in participating. And we have a couple of other options mentioned, as well as just a general overall sector seat. Comments from commissioners about what to do in this area? Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yeah, I forwarded the email I wrote the email on behalf of the Conservation Commission, and the Conservation Commission is voicing strong support for retaining a seat on the NPDC. I could certainly see a similar model where we did a Conservation Commission or a designee like we did with housing authority, and that might solve people's issues. That being said, I think, I am in support of the land bank participating in some way or fashion as well. But I don't think we need necessarily one or the other. There could be both.
Yes.
And I think that there are very different goals of those two organizations, whereas the Concom is, really focused on regulatory issues and land protection, and the land bank is more focused on open space and access. That being said, if we do decide to move forward with the land bank, we sort of need to decide, are we talking about land bank staff? Are we talking about land bank commission? Because it's two separate things. Or are we talking about land bank designates whoever they want from either staff or commission? Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Joe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. While I served 6 years on the Concom, I agree with Seth's comment. It was really nice to get feedback and have a representative here and know what was going on, and getting updates monthly. I really find that the Conservation Commission should remain on this board. And, as Seth said, we're in charge of wetlands, and that's extremely important to town Nantucket. And then I also want to put a vote in for the land bank. I think open space, it's extremely important. I think they go hand in hand. So I would be in favor of giving 2 seats to this category. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Joe. I'll add my perspective. I really appreciated Seth's comments, and especially that you were able to take it to the Conservation Commission for their discussion. I had made the point at our last meeting, or the one before, it's hard to remember, that I thought that the Concom had a very narrow scope. And Seth pointed out that, there's a greater interest for conservation than just the scope of the Concom. And my concern was, well, what if Concom ends up appointing somebody to NPNEDC who is not particularly well educated or well versed in conservation issues, because that's a possibility. And so I like the idea of keeping the Concom as the appointing authority and giving them the flexibility to designate either one of their commissioners or someone else who may well represent conservation interests. And then I also favor putting the land bank in, so having 2 seats in this area. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just speak very quickly. People can find me saying comments of a similar effect on many Concom meetings, but what people think the role of the Concom is actually not the full scope of the Concom's duties. So the Conservation Commission in Massachusetts significantly predates the Wetlands Protection Act, and conservation commissions were actually created to do open space preservation, acquisition, and education. And that was true on Nantucket. Our Conservation Commission was formed in 1963, and Wetlands Protection Act didn't occur until 1972. So, and then the Land Bank in 1983, when it was formed, sort of assumed a lot of the roles that conservation commissions do in other municipalities. But off island, wetland permitting is a very small, or in some cases negligible, impact of conservation commissions. They do mostly open space, recreation, access, acquisition, things like that. And we have done less of that on Nantucket because we have other organizations like the Land Bank and all of our environmental nonprofits, and because we're so bogged down with the number of permits here. We're the busiest permitting body in the state for conservation commissions. But that doesn't diminish the fact that our actual scope is significantly broader than people think. So I'll just add that to the conversation here, that not to disagree with you, but what people see, what people think we are, is actually not the scope of the Conservation Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. I learned something from that, and I appreciate that. Barry?
Yeah, for now, I'd like us to kind of steer more into the organization, and later on, kind of figure out who that organization is, because I keep kind of hearing every so often that as an organization is being reviewed here at the moment, that it's going to be staff involved in the process. I, for one, am just going to tell you real quickly, I never have viewed staff as part of any of these processes in here. I view that as a board process, but we can discuss that later. The only thing I'd worry about is having two environmental conservation entities in there. And I'm sorry, I don't, everyone's going to hate me. Okay. But I always worry about that. They do have relatively similar emissions as well, too. And there's always that potential for collusion to happen under that. And that's why I'm just thinking I'd rather just go with one entity and see how that plays itself out, as opposed to having to sort out those kind of issues later. So I'm just looking at the potential future. I'm not saying that is going to happen right at this moment, but I'm a little bit more of a purist when it comes to those kind of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. So we've heard a couple of suggestions that we have 2 seats in this area. Are there other opinions from commissioners for 1 seat or 2 seats before we go to Leslie? All right, I'm not seeing any hands. Leslie?
Thanks. And I'm not advocating for one group or the other. I just wanted to point out, as you all have talked about appointed or elected, that the Conservation Commission is an appointed group appointed by the Select Board, and the Land Bank is not an elected group. So when you're thinking about the composition of elected versus appointed, that may be something that you want to keep in mind.
Thank you, Leslie. All right, Nat, you have your hand up?
Yeah, just to, since she just said that, I want to just say one more thing. It's a state agency, just like us, just like Housing Authority, and I think that that's a huge part of it, of the idea of the land bank. And also, Seth's points are really informative. I mean, people forget who we are too. I was actually thinking of the MPDC the whole time he was explaining people not understand the Conservation Commission. I wonder if maybe we're tied for first for the most misunderstood commission on Nantucket. But anyway, I think that as time goes on, the land bank, and there's going to be a lot of things that are related. It's already sort of happening now, okay? And I think it's important. I think they should have been on the commission a long time ago, to be totally truthful. It just never got brought up before until, a couple of years ago, or whenever it was, December of that couple of years ago. But anyway, so I think that it's important in the elected versus appointed thing that Leslie just brought up. I mean, that's true. I think the more elected people that are on is good, but I still feel that this seat and the Conservation Commission should remain. I think they're separate in their own missions and their own roles. I think the addition of the land bank is a major plus for this organization going forward indefinitely. So thank you.
Thank you, Nat. I want to note that Don Holgate has joined us. Thank you. And so for the sake of discussion this evening, I think what I'd like to do, with your permission, is put a 1 for the land bank and a 1 for the Conservation Commission. And if we get to the end of the list and the list is too long, maybe this is an area we need to revisit. But for the purposes of discussion tonight, I'd like to move on to the next category. And I'm not hearing a lot of new information on this one. So next category, historic preservation, had broad interest from the commissioners. Let's look at that. And so again, some for the general sector, some for specific organizations. Comments from commissioners in this area. Yes, Joe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't really Nantucket is historic. So when I say that word, that comes to mind. So I don't really see that we need a seat for historic preservation. I'm not opposed to it as a whole. I think that Holly Backus is, when we need her, she comes in. So for anyone to insinuate that we don't have historic preservation in mind, I think that's a false statement. And I just feel that we're governed by the fact that the island's historic. So I don't really see that this seat really needs to be taken care of. If there was a direction I would go with a certified local government commissioner. I think that the HCC looks at a lot of the town, but does not go really out planning it. Everything comes to them. I think that they do some guidelines, etc. I think the historic commission is looking at smaller projects, and I don't really feel like there's a connection to this board that would be really beneficial. I think Holly Backus, Bert Johnson really put it the best way. I think that we need to have the DPW come in every 6 months. We need to have other organizations come in, but I think Holly should be, coming in every 6 months as well and giving an update, or if we have a task before us that she could lend a hand. I mean, she stated that publicly, so I think that that's something we should really look at. I just don't think this is a seat that, I don't want to say wasted, but really I think there's other organizations that would have a stronger vision for the long-term planning of Nantucket, and I don't think this is it. I think that we're just going to go forward and get the town moving in the right direction, and then I think we can adjust any minor things that would be towards historical preservation or the history of Nantucket. I think that would be important, but I don't really feel that this is a place that we should be giving a seat away. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Joe. I'm going to take a slight detour. Can we add Holly's name down at the bottom where we have the transportation and the energy? Let's just add the preservation planner. Not necessarily that they're ex officio, but just to remember that we do have 3 staff members who can provide support in these areas. And then we'll go to Barry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you. You took the words right out of my mouth. I think she would probably be the best choice to be part of our board, not in a voting capacity, but certainly to advise us. And the reason why I was really keen on the Certified Local Government Commission is that their view on things is far broader based than, let's say, an HDC person. If you haven't had the opportunity to talk with Holly and understand what that role and mission is, as being the CLG liaison to the state, I mean, it's incredible what happens there. And I know that her and Lauren, again, when we're dealing with things, look at it from different perspectives, but are able to focus it back down. For instance, like with the wind farm going on, the two of them made some incredible progress with things. So I would love the idea that for historic preservation, we do that using the staff member Holly in a non-voting capacity as ex officio. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Wendy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really intrigued by, Barry's provocation or whatever, like it was about, that we need to think much more regionally. I love that. I know that I don't enough. And that's absolutely a really good lens for a lot of this and a lot of what we should do. I really like the idea of using Holly Backus as that ex officio. That more regular reporting is just going to serve us so well. So I'm all for that structure. I think you're right. I mean, when you think of like what the HDC has to think about, I mean, talk about specifics. I was going to say minutiae, like very small, like really they're paying attention to that stuff, which isn't what we're supposed to be doing. So, so I do appreciate that or I support all that as a way to go. The Holly Backus ex officio route, to be clear.
Thank you, Wendy. Further thoughts on this category? All right, so do we want to put a 1 in the general sector historic preservation, or do we not want to put a 1? I'm not really hearing clear direction. Let's go to Dawn first.
I mean, I would suggest putting 1 in this category. I think, respectfully, I think that it would be helpful to have more of an at-large member rather than a staff member who looks at things through the historic preservation lens, with our entire island being a historic landmark. I think it's going to be hard for it to be someone from the Historic District Commission with the amount of hours they already put in, but someone designated in this category, and I don't, and whether it's appointed through the NPNEDC or whether it's appointed through the county commissioners, I'm not sure exactly how we want to handle that. I'm sorry I came in so late and I don't know what's already been talked about, but I was having some thoughts about having some more of these categories just appointed through the county commissioners as sort of an impartial body that encompasses all people elected to the select board. And of course, I'm on the select board, so that is not self-serving. I do not need to be appointing any more people, but it felt like it might make people more comfortable than things being appointed from within or from going the election route.
Thank you, Don. Just briefly to catch you up, I did throw out the idea that there are 3 decisions that we're making in each category. One is defining the seat, one is defining the mechanism for filling the seat, and one is the appointing authority for the seat. So yes, that is part of the discussion, but we're working on defining the seats to begin with.
Okay, very good.
Barry?
That's okay. I'm not really keen on wanting to put a 1 in there at the moment. I think we've marked that out down below with the staff thing. So unless there's unless there's a sense of where that appointment is coming from, I'm a little more inclined to think that, at least on our commission, and given the focus of our commission, that in this particular case, staff will serve us incredibly well, and I think you'll be getting more information in a far more timely manner. And like I said, they're there to advise us and bring us up to date on things, and they won't have any voting capacity under which to do it. But I think the people that we've managed to identify so far are really top notch in what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Joe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree. I think that I don't want to put a 1 in this spot right yet. And Holly said that she would continue supporting us in any way, shape, or fashion. So I really don't think that would be the proper way. And I don't even know about voting. So if there was the seat that county commissioners would have that vote. So I kind of need to think about that one. I'm not really in favor of that right now as well, but I don't want to get too deep in the weeds. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Joe. So again, I'm not hearing clear direction. Do we need to actually do a roll call vote to determine whether or not to do this? Nat?
Mary, can I just make one quick comment to add to Joe's point there?
Yep.
Let's just holistically look at this like we just did with the housing. We made a decision, and I think it was the right one, to allow the housing authority to be the entity that would select someone if it wasn't from their organization. I'm having that same kind of thinking process with this. We've never had this seat to begin with. I realize that, but to get this seat, if we choose to have this seat off on the right foot, I think that is a good point. I understand Dawn's idea of the county sort of fixes that question, having them appoint someone, but let's just put that aside for a minute. What entity here would pick somebody, or who would do that? That sounds like the NPNEDC would be the one to pick from an organization. would be the other way to do it. They don't have that existing seat like the housing authority does. That's already been doing it for years and it's sort of set up already. This is a new concept. It has to sort of get done the right way. I like to think about it some more. I agree with Joe. I just think that this is an NPNEDC type appointment from one or two or three of these, or whatever organization, if we choose to do it. That's how I see it working fairly. Thank you.
Thank you, Nat. Barry?
Sorry about that. I think still I wouldn't leave it as an amorphous choice by the NPNEDC. I'd like us to kind of focus into what we think would be an appropriate source to target that out of. And again, that's if you don't want to leave it as a staff member, you have a CLG commission that's out there as well too. So again, given the broad base of what they need to look at, not only locally but regionally again, I think these two things align. The NPNEDC and like a CLG align very nicely to each other. So I again, as I've said, I want to try to be more distinctive about who we're targeting as the entity under which to do it. And not leave it to randomness, because depending upon their length of service and stuff, you could find that it may be switching between different entities as time moves along. And I'm a big fan of continuity when we come to that as well too, about where that goes. So thank you.
All right, so to move the discussion along, what I'd like to do is put a 1 in historic preservation for the sector. And it's TBD for how we're going to fill that, how we're going to define that. And the reason I want to put a 1 there is that 8 of the 9 commissioners who submitted suggestions included this sector. And so in whatever we can come back later to discussing, how to fill it, whether it comes from what particular organization or who appoints it. But I want to move the discussion along for tonight. All right, so the next one I have on my list, let's see. I want to go to social services or human services. What is the name of that, Barry, on your, social services down at the bottom? So we've covered most of the ones that had very strong support. And so now we're in the sort of middle range. And I'm leaving at large until the end because we may end up with different opinions about at large after we see what seats we've decided on. So for the social services, so right now, the NPNEDC has a representative on the Contract Review Committee. The Contract Review Committee is a subcommittee of is it the Council for Human Resources? Sorry, I'm getting the
Council for Human Services.
Council for Human Services, thank you. That council is under the Health and Human Services Department. So we have, I want to avoid creating a circular loop where we have a representative on a board that is a subcommittee of a board that ends up representing on NPNEDC. So that's a little bit of an issue to unravel. But generally, let's talk about the idea of a sector seat for social services or human services. To my mind, because the Health and Human Services Department offers services for the elderly, for disabled population, for veterans population, this was a good place to look because we could encompass a number of segments of the community here. And I know we had some other people. Barry, did you include elderly as a separate category on your list, or where did that end up?
I did, and I think it's worth looking at the elderly just for a second because there was really only one entity that popped out of that, and one other person who left it as just like a generalized sector. So I don't know I guess it's kind of up to you all whether you want to include it under social, or whether you just want to deal with it under its own accord, given the lack of interest that kind of showed up here in the grid.
Can we cut and paste that elder services down next to the social, just so we can look at them together?
Just, Madam Chair, there is really no elder services per se.
Oh, it says elderly services.
Yeah, there's either the Council on Aging or
well, the sector named elderly services. So but mission accomplished. Right. I just wanted to look at them side by side, whatever.
Okay. Thank you.
Seth, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I'm having some technical difficulties, so bear with me. So I had indicated a desire for elder services, youth services, and social services, but I think looking back on it, we can probably hit all of those targets with like health and human services as one entity. I'm not exactly sure who the correct entity is, but I think I'd be willing to combine those seats. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Other comments from commissioners on this sector? So there were 6 responses that included the social services, and it looks like the same people who had elderly services also had social services. So for the purposes of discussion, and thank you, Seth, I think we can look at those together. Do we want to create this as a sector category and sort of leave the details about how the seat gets filled and who does the appointing for a later discussion so that we can move on? Or is there further discussion on this category? Seth, your hand is up. I'm not sure if that's an artifact or you have another comment. Seth might be having technical. Why don't we go to Barry?
Yeah, thanks. I think the only question I'm going to posit here again for us all is, we do some incredibly good things on a local basis. But again, I want to also start saying maybe I don't have the construct here with, leaving it either as a sector. How does that begin to become a regional thing in relation to the mission of our regional planning agency? And that was why I didn't put anything in there, because I was having a very tough time trying to construct it on a regional basis versus, the fact that, we do this locally incredibly well. So I'm hoping maybe someone can help me refine that focus a little bit as to how we got there. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. One of the things I noted was that in our objectives, we have a category of public services, and we have supporting the healthy communities initiatives in that as an objective. So that to me was sort of the gateway, as well as more generally sort of things like community engagement and supporting opportunity for people of all backgrounds. That's not just an ethnic category. That's also an age category, a wealth category. So to me, the Health and Human Services Department is all encompassing, and there are issues that every community faces. Perhaps there is another entity, and I agree with you, something with a regional focus might be helpful, and also might remove the sort of confusion about going round and round about who's on what committee. So I don't know if we want to get into that tonight, but I think that's why many of us recommended this category for a seat. Happy to hear other people's comments on that too. Right, Seth may have been disconnected. Seth, if you're there and can hear us, please go ahead with any further comment, but it looks like you might be frozen. Okay, so do we have consensus to have a 1 for the category at the moment? And again, these can always be revisited as we get to the end. Barry?
All right, you know what? There is a Council for Human Services that is there. And that may be what becomes the entity under which to begin to look at it. And if you're not clear on it, I just pulled this up about a minute or two ago just to get the name of the organization right. Their focus is I think if you're going to look at anyone, they've probably got the larger focus on this particular area that we're in this particular sector that we're looking at. So I don't want to lose sight of that somehow.
Can we just throw their name on there somewhere?
Yeah, Council.
Council for Human Services. I spoke to Brooke Moore about this. I wanted a little guidance from her about, what was the appropriate agency, and she mentioned the Council for Human Services as well. The difficulty is because we have a seat on the Contract Review Committee, which is a subcommittee of the Council for Human Services. We get into that circular logic. So I don't want to try and solve that logic tonight, but I do think that we're talking about having a seat in this sector, and we need to figure out how that works, and do we need to remove ourselves from the Contract Review Committee in order for this to make sense? That's all beyond the scope of the discussion tonight. Dawn?
I mean, or is it a seat that rather than being another appointed body that we can always draw on their knowledge from or from the Human Services Director, if we wanted someone from the sector, maybe it would be more appropriate for it to be more of an at-large member that has an association with somewhere like Fairwinds or Gosnold or a safe place to sit. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you, Dawn. Again, for discussion, are we okay with a 1 in this category and moving on? It's a complicated, wide-ranging category. Barry?
I'm sorry. No, let me.
Okay. All right. So I think that's where we're landing. And my apologies. I'm not trying to, force the discussion in a particular direction, but I just do want to keep it moving. So.
Mary, just for clarification, I'm going to put a 1 by social services, but we'll be putting a 0 by elderly and youth, since that said that
Right.
kind of generally captures the other two, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Megan.
Yep.
All right. So the next up is arts and culture. So very similar. 6 of the 9 responses mentioned the arts and culture. So let's take a look at that. All right, that's up at the top. So further thoughts from commissioners on this section. We had 1 each organization get caught out, and most of the responses just were for the sector. Further discussion. Can we do the same thing here, but indicate that, yes, we want the sector, but we need to delve further into this? Right, I'm not seeing any objection to that. Okay. And the third one with 6 out of 9 recommendations was the transportation sector. So I had some thoughts on this. I've had the same idea as Barry, that the transportation program manager staff position is possibly the best representation of the entirety of the transportation sector. When you think about this, this is a huge area. It's everything from the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee that we have, to the Traffic Safety Committee that the town has, to the Roads and Right-of-Way Committee that the town has, to over-the-road truckers, to car rental agencies, to gasoline suppliers, there's a lot that you could include and call it the transportation sector. And it would be difficult to have one person from the community represent all of those interests, especially because sometimes they're in opposition to each other. So I thought that the resources that we have already might be sufficient. But I don't want to have mine be the only voice, or me and Barry agreeing, be the only people talking about this. So I would like to hear from other commissioners about this sector. Nat?
Yeah, I
And I
agree
didn't
with.
even mention the steamship, Nat, I'm sorry. or
No,
the
no. And I want to just say, I agree with you 100%. I'll add a few more. Mike, this is his second round, back here. I mean, we kind of forget he wasn't here for a couple of years. And he's, living in Hyannis is really helpful because he's already gone down to Falmouth, met with Steamship, and he's going to be able to develop a relationship with the Hyannis, Barnstable people that he needs to be able to be communicating with. And he already knows what he's doing. Like this is way too big to be piddling around trying to like find someone, outside of him that's focused on this. He has all the necessary tentacles involved in everything that you mentioned. With he does the traffic safety. He's on our meetings at right away, and he's in tune with everything that's going on. So this is an ex officio, without a doubt, type of position. If anyone is in this list, this one is. So that's it. Thank you very much. Not to mention the state stuff. That's pretty obvious too, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you, Nat. Other commissioners? There were 3 commissioners who did not indicate a preference for this. Do you want to give us your perspective on this? Wendy?
Sure. I just feel the way we just, the way it was just outlined, I think we do cover that well. That's all. So I support it.
Thank you, Wendy. Joe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with what Nat and you all said, so I would change my vote.
Okay.
No, I mean, it's a great point, and this is why we're having this debate or conversation.
Christy or Seth, did you want to weigh in? You did include this category, so. All right, I see a hand from John first, and then we'll go to Seth.
Yes, Madam Chair. I agree 100% of what you had stated. And really, Mike has attended 99% of our meetings anyway, so he's almost like an in-house official that we hear from. So I think to have it ex officio would be obviously the wisest and I think most obvious choice. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, I think Mike obviously does a great job with our commission, and we're paying him to do that job. And I support moving forward with the plan that people represented. My reason for including the seat here was to make sure that we had that sector continue to be represented. But if it makes sense at the staff level, then that's fine.
Thank you, Seth. I want to add that the ex officio, I'm not sure that's the right term, and it's not something that we've discussed at length about how that would operate. I would prefer to see that marked as staff in that column. But that's a discussion we can return to as we get through the whole list. Okay, so there was so of the 9 submissions, there were 5 for the land bank. We've kind of already covered the land bank, I think, in our conservation discussion. And there was also the diversity, equity, and inclusion that had 4, so less than a majority of the 9. But definitely something that I wanted to bring back to the commission for discussion. I see there's a note there for the Interfaith Council. I don't recall that being specified in anyone's submissions. I could be wrong, of course. It's a lot to go through, but that is a religious organization, and I would be highly opposed to including a religious organization, no matter how dedicated they are to the community. Barry?
That was actually from Bert Johnson.
Okay, thank you. No, I appreciate the clarification.
I did validate that with the Interfaith Council being on there.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Barry.
Yeah, even though they may be well, I'm reluctant to say church environment. It is more, it does have a religious based focus at this point. I'm not, if we're gonna go that route as a commission, I would want to not leave it so incredibly open about who that is, but I think trying to define an entity that does it. There was something that's tickling in the back of my mind too, where the Interfaith Council played a little bit bigger role than looking at things just from a religious base, but they certainly were filling that mission in each of their different entities with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I appreciate Bert bringing it up, because I was struggling with that one, and he actually found an organization that may fill that method, even though we may have our own separate opinions whether they're a good choice or not. But thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Seth, is your hand up for this? No. Okay.
It is. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I did the wrong order there. So I just want to go back to the discussion of like the inclusion of staff, or maybe not if they're at every meeting, but are able to provide regular updates or interface with this commission. The town of Nantucket has a DEI director. I understand that's the town, not the region. We also have an environmental justice community representative who is a staff member of the town. Roberto Santamaria is our representative. We have two potential options within town staff that could fill that niche for us. I hesitate to speak for them or ask them to do more work than they already are doing. But if we're already considering, including staff representatives for things like energy, historic preservation, we might want to adopt a similar model for these sectors as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Other comments from commissioners? All right, so this had 4 submissions of the 9, if we're including the Interfaith Council as in this category, 3 if we're not. And so it's up to commissioners. What do we want to do here? Seth has a suggestion that we may be able to build a stronger relationship with the town staff in this department. Certainly an option. My suggestion when I recommended this was that we ask the DEI director to appoint a representative to this seat, not necessarily from any existing organization, but maybe from a pool of applicants. So just let people know that. Any further thoughts from commissioners? Barry?
Thanks. I think maybe in this particular venue, I'd like to start with what we've been asking for with some other entities, which is to maybe have them come in every 6 months or so and have a dialogue with us. And as time moves along, we can, I think, maybe make a determination from that juncture whether that would be something that could be on the commission in the future, and see what their thought process is to how that partnership works. There's what I'm looking for, because I'm not sure I understand how that partnership works. A lot of the entities that you're dealing with here, like Mike, for instance, deals in the whole area of environmental justice, which includes these principles. And that is kind of a big thing for any of the town agencies lately. Who was it? We were just dealing with Jeff Carlson not too long ago, who is realizing that environmental justice is now a big thing of the Conservation Commission, and they need to take a far more proactive role in it. So I think it's there. It's just maybe not. It's a part of what other people are doing, and it's hidden from us. But it's something that, like with the Mike Burns, he's got to keep that at the top of the list about, you know, any of the decision bases he's doing. So, and I would probably dare say if we're thinking about Holly as well too. Again, I think you would find that environmental justice factors in to any of the decision bases that she has to encounter as well too. So I'm not sure I'd want to just fill this role and then figure it out later. If we're going to do anything, I would like this relationship to just go gently and formulate over time, and then see what see if it really is something that works well for both entities, and understand how that also is going to dovetail too into things like, you know, I'll just pick on Mike again, what he's doing with things. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Other comments from commissioners? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Given that there were only 3 or 4 votes, I don't think we're proceeding with a 1 in this category. If somebody wants to advocate for that, by all means, please speak up. There are 2 remaining categories that I saw that had nominations that we haven't discussed yet. One is the non-voting taxpayers. So again, this had 3 recommendations from the 9 submissions. And I'm not sure where that is on the list. General public. Oh, no, actually, they're both in the middle under general public. So at large and advisory committee of non-voting taxpayers are the 2 remaining things that we haven't discussed. Barry, if you want to do I'm going to caveat that. So I want to come back to renewable energy and sustainability, because I see them on the list and haven't gotten to them, but I'll come back to them. So at-large member and advice. So let's start with advisory committee of non-voting taxpayers. I counted 3. I think, Barry, you have 2. So that did not get a lot of support in our submissions. Does anybody want to speak to that?
Yeah.
Oh, I counted 3 because of Joe.
Yeah, and
the replacement for the planning board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So Nat, please go.
Just go ahead. Whoever was that Joe or Barry that was about to speak? Sorry.
I
couldn't
had
tell.
bits and pieces from 3 people. So you're in my top left corner, Nat, so I picked you
All
first.
right, so I'll just real quick. Just what I was thinking here was the whole at-large discussion, not, you know, the 3, how many we have, blah, 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 right? So my thought was 2 general public, and like we have right now, we have 3, right? So I have 2 general public and one non-voting taxpayer was my thought, to get them into this commission somehow through the at-large process. So we still have 3, but one of them is not a general public. That was I'm sorry if there was any confusion of what I meant with my submission, but that's what I was thinking about and having a discussion on that tonight. I'm not, you know, it was just an idea. It wasn't some, like, you know, this isn't like the Mike Burns one where it's 100% no doubter. This is sort of like that conversation about the 3 is one we have to have. So that's why I said that. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Nat. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to reference the letter in the packet that you had communications with the town clerk.
Yes.
So I think that the advisory committee of non-voting taxpayers as an entity isn't necessarily relevant from like a regional planning perspective. That being said, the idea to include more diverse voices, you know, some of who may be year-round residents, some who may be seasonal residents, some who may be taxpayers, some who may not be taxpayers, is a great idea. But how I read that letter, we're not precluded from having people on the commission who are not voting taxpayers. You know, it sounded like it was okay for them to be on the commission even if they weren't taxpayers. So thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Other comments? Did I cut anybody off when I went to Nat? Joe?
No, Nat cut me off, but that's okay. I'll forgive him later. No, I did. So I had 3 at large. So I think, you know, as we kind of get down to delving down to this, I'm fine in keeping a couple seats of the at large. And so like Nat, mine was a little betwixt and between, like trying to get some information, but also keep at large. And so I was getting a little too specific, but I would be fine with, you know, a non-voting taxpayer and 2 at large members. If that's the way that it had to go, I kind of agree with that as well. So thank you.
Right, Barry?
Yeah, the non-voting taxpayers one, I think when I was seriously giving it some thought, I thought they might be a good inclusion on the board because you know, I know with every town meeting we have, they are well represented, and even in certain decision bases that have been made over time, they do get included in certain things. They may help with us to begin to define a very different perspective that maybe we're not looking at. And that's why I made the decision to at least include them on here, if for no other reason, for sake of discussion. But I don't want to dismiss them too rapidly because, like I said, they are a presence that is out there and drawn upon from time to time. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. So my perspective here is that I think it is, first of all, as a regional commission, the status of a taxpayer is, I don't see that as closely correlated to our purpose. And so I think it is important that we consider all members of the community as eligible to have a seat on this commission, whether that's a 16-year-old, if they express an interest, or it's somebody who is a non-voter, or it's somebody who is a non-resident, but is, you know, part of the community here. I think those are all groups that we need to consider as we think about, you know, planning issues. I don't think that the advisory committee of non-voting taxpayers is the right way to represent that group, because by definition, they're taxpayers, which means they're property owners. So if you are a non-voting renter, you're not represented by this group. If you you know, don't own property for any reason, whether you're too young or you live with a family or whatever the case may be, you're not represented by this group. So I don't see that particular committee as being the right entity to define who serves on the commission. But I think the concept of including you know, any member of the public that is involved in the community is very important. John, comments?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to point out it is an advisory committee. I agree. I don't know if it's necessarily pertinent that we have them on a full seat. I do like 2 at large, but what's to prevent an advisory committee from presenting from time to time their opinions about, if they're really paying attention to the monthly meetings, you know, we can invite them just as we would some other committee or entity to speak on what their concerns are. Also, this is right now is very convenient with the Zoom meeting. We don't know whoever would be on the, taking a full seat. If and when we do come to either a hybrid, but if we go to in-person meetings, we're actually giving away a seat for someone that may or may not be living on the island. They may be owning property on the island, but they may be in California, and I don't know if they'd be in a position to represent the board. So just for those reasons, I'm not too fond of giving a full seat for this committee. But thank you.
Thank you, John. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think that your discussion of, wanting to make the at-large general public open to all is great. And we should go beyond that and not just make it a possibility, but we should actively try to seek diversity in that. And I know we're not talking about the exact selection process right now, but I think if the NP and EDC is going to be appointing those general public, we could make a policy that says something to the effect that people will be chosen that in an effort to represent diverse voices, sectors, identities, ages, backgrounds, whatever we care about. We could have a policy that when you apply says, we're not only selecting you on your technical skills, but also on who you are as a person.
Thank you, Seth. And just as a note, as we're considering this, we will get to a point where we have to decide what's appropriate for the enabling legislation and what's appropriate for the bylaws. So as Seth said, we can also have policies expressed in the bylaws that help us to achieve our objectives. Nat?
Okay, so you guys have already changed my mind. This is good. This is why we're here, right? And it's getting close to 6 o'clock. So what Seth just said, and John said, I like this idea of, okay, scratch out the non-voting taxpayer being a seat and add language necessary. Leslie and staff can figure that out, what that is, to include someone from the sector, not more than one of the three at-larges, but add some language, as Seth just said, to that application process. That's perfect. I didn't think of that the other night, so I think that's a great way to do it without it being a definitive seat. We're adding the opening it up a little bit further than it is now. I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Nat. Other comments from commissioners? All right, so do we want to put a 2 or a 3 in this general public at large? I'm seeing a 2 from Barry. Everybody hold up how many fingers you want. 2 from John. You know what? Your test, I'm seeing a lot of 2s, I believe. Is anybody a 3? All right, I'm not seeing a strong advocacy for 3. So let's put a 2 in this. Glad that nobody was a comedian and started waving all their fingers around.
Nothing but love with peace signs, Mary.
Yeah. So I wanted to come back to the renewable energy sustainability. National Grid was also listed there. There was, let's not talk about at large in that respect, but I think with the sustainability and renewable energy, they did not have strong suggestions, and the town does have staff that address those areas. We have the sustainability programs manager, Vince Murphy, and the energy coordinator, Lauren Sinatra. So my thought would be that we would, make more of an effort to liaise with staff on current issues in that area. But again, open to thoughts from commissioners about those sectors. Barry?
Yeah, I think Lauren here would probably be a good choice to kind of hear from her on a regular basis, because maybe what caused this to clog up a bit is that, like with Mike, where he's got his fingers on the pulse of what's going on with the airport, what's going on with the steamship authority, um, those various entities. Lauren is covering a wide variety of things that are very critical to the island. And in order to make things happen, even if you think about, for instance, like electric, we still have to liaise with what goes on, not only on the mainland over in Hyannis and stuff, but also with the state as well too. And her job really covers a diverse amount of different energy sectors that are out there. So, I mean, she's dealing with things that basically cover the entire spectrum, be it wind, solar, electric, propane, geothermal, and the changes that are occurring as well with things such as the shift from incandescent to LED, again, the shift from gas-driven engines to electric engines. These, I think, are all very vital things that the commission needs to constantly be appraised of and on top of. I think as well, there's an opportunity for her, with the support of the commission, to get, a much more robust relationship at times with a lot of the off-island entities and what we're trying to do. Case in point, not everyone likes the wind farm that's out there, but again, having someone who's really on top of that is a good thing. So I know that she would be enthused with doing it. And I think having her on the commission, again, we can change that ex officio to staff and just make it easy. I mean, whatever you want to call it. But I think she is a vital part that we are definitely missing out on and need to be a lot as a commission, both especially regionally. We need to really be on top of that. So I'm a really major advocate. I'm just surprised. Like I said, I don't know why this didn't. I'm surprised this didn't score higher, but maybe it was because of the diversity that was out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Joe?
Yeah, Barry kind of took everything I want to say, but
sorry.
I think Lauren, no, all good. But I do think Lauren would be great. I think if, looking at the bottom of the list, if we could have everyone come in every 3 to 6 months, I think would be really wise to keep us up to speed. If there's nothing to report, then they don't need you. But I think having them show up frequently would be great. But I think that Lauren would check a lot of those boxes for us. So thank you.
Okay, any other comments from commissioners? I'm seeing, nobody saying we've got to have a seat in this area. So I think we're okay with a 0 on this, and the point taken to emphasize the connections that we already have. So we should take a quick scan through the list. Have we covered everything that's on this list? I just don't want to, accidentally leave somebody out.
Mary,
sorry,
Mary, can I just out real quick about back to the energy coordinator position? I mean,
Yes.
while it's not an NPDDC position, it is part of PLUS. It's under the PLUS agreement. And in our organizational chart, both she and the transportation program manager are under our regional services section. So, maybe having some regular reporting from her would be a good thing for everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, Leslie. So I guess, Megan, are you looking for us on that list, or is there any potential seat that we haven't discussed that somebody wants to bring up? I guess is the question I'm asking.
Mm-mm.
All right, Barry, your hand is up, but do you have a comment? You're shaking your head no, but you have your hand up. So
no, I'm agreeing with you. There's nothing else I want to add, and I was just hoping that when we're looking at the at-large position under the general public there, Megan, can you move that 2 down into the next line down? See how you got it just as.
I'm sorry, where do you want this?
So that 2 that's there, get rid of that.
Yeah.
Get rid of that and then just move it to the next line down where it just says at large.
Right.
See where I'm going?
Okay.
There you go.
Right.
I'm sorry.
6 of one, half dozen of the other, but
That's the anal retentive pharmacist coming out. Okay. Can't
right.
help it.
So, Megan, what count did we end up with suggested number of seats? And hopefully it's not like 37.
No, so I'm getting, if you do not include historic preservation, because that, we don't know if it's going to be staff or an appointed person, 10 members. If we do include that, it'll be 11 members.
Really?
Yep. So we have one,
You're counting three planning board and 2.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We'll skip this for now. 8. Oh, sorry. 9, 10, 11, 12. I must have missed the line. 13.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So we came out at 13 for the total?
Let me do that again. 1, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 12, 13 if you count historic.
Okay, so we need to have that discussion again on historic preservation. Is staff sufficient, or do we want to have a seat dedicated to an appointee for that? Joe?
I'd go back to the 3 at large. I think they're working really well. And I go back to my comment. I don't feel that seat is necessary. I think that Holly, going back to Nat's comment about Mike Burns, being a Swiss Army knife, I think that Holly is that and then some. So I really think that staff could do that. And she has told me that she would be fine doing that. So, yeah, that's kind of what the direction I'm going.
Other comments?
Madam Chair, I didn't put my hand
Snap.
up. Yeah, I want to just sort of capture this moment. We haven't actually talked about the total that we wanted, and we're coming out with the one that I hoped was 13. And to go back to the if we need to have the 3 at large to make 13, I mean, that's the right thing. Because again, adding that language, if we do vote and agree to do that, which I think it makes a lot of sense, it kind of covers everything without really changing anything, but with fixing it a little bit, tweaking it. And to go back to Lauren's position, that position is like Mike in a different role. She is so connected with the state and all the stuff that goes on up there. It's imperative that she is that position. It might not be her someday. So that position is vital. You just don't see it. It's not as visual as Mike's, because Mike's is dealing with us on every meeting with his report and all that. But what she does is similar to Mike in the sense of her connectivity with state stuff. So she's on those meetings up there and she knows exactly what's going on up there. So, I just wanted to reiterate that as well. So, yeah, 13. And if it takes the 3 at large to get us there, then I think that's what we should be doing. Thank you.
Okay. Megan, can you read off the list of seats just to give everybody the opportunity to, hear it verbally rather than looking at it on the screen? Joe, is your hand still up for a new comment or an old? Okay.
Sorry.
So we have 1 seat from arts and culture, 1 seat from the business sector, 1 county commissioner seat, a seat from the land bank, and a seat from the conservation commission, 1 housing seat, 3 planning board seats, 1 social service seat, staff members from transportation and renewable energy. And then it sounds like what we're determining to make the 13 is 3 at large and a staff for historic preservation, or a board member for historic preservation and 2 at large. So that's to get to the 13.
Okay. So did we settle on that question? We've had suggestions on whether it's 3 at large and not historic, or or as it's shown on the screen. So as it was shown on the screen a minute ago. Further comments? Where are we going to end up on that? Barry?
Think,
Okay, let Nat go.
no, I think just real quick, that cultural seat, what was it? Megan, what was that one called? I missed that one.
Arts and
the
culture.
social, well, we had social services and arts and culture.
Arts and culture. So I think it's more coming down to 2 at large in arts and culture, or 3 at large and no arts and culture. So I'm fine with whatever we decide as a group.
Let's hold off on that arts and culture. We're still trying to suss out what's happening with historic preservation. Or at least I am.
Oh, I'm good with the staff. I'm sorry, Mary. I know that's not what I was supposed to be talking about, but I mean, I'm fine with staff, with Ollie. I think the case has been made pretty strongly for that tonight.
Okay, Leslie, you had a comment?
I was also going to voice the opinion that I'm strongly hearing that staff can fulfill the historic preservation role if needed.
Thank you, Leslie. All right, so, and now Nat, to further discussion on Nat's question about the arts and culture seat. So Nat, you're saying that you would favor an at-large seat rather than an arts and culture seat? Is that?
I mean, I mean, how does that fit? I mean, do we appoint it, or is it, I mean, I don't know. I can't. I don't really have a preference per se. I leave that up to people that understand that side of that sector better. But, if we decide not to have that, then the 3 at large. If we decide to have it, then 2 at large. I'm fine with it. I just don't I don't really have an opinion as far as that position goes, but I think that's where we're at as far as, I think all the other ones are pretty solidly decided. I think that one might not be quite as much.
All right, so Megan, I think you need to jump in here with your question.
Yeah, so just for a point of clarification, if you were to swap the arts and culture in lieu of an extra at-large, you'd be actually bringing it down to 11, whereas if you kept the arts and culture, increase the at-large to 3, you'd be landing at 13 members.
Oh, I thought you said
think what
2.
you wanted.
Oh,
No.
I'm missing.
So we're going to increase that to 3, and now we keep arts and culture, and we're at a total of 13 members is what
Megan, I didn't hear. That's not what you said earlier. I'm so sorry. At the beginning of this call, I thought you said 2 with them was 13. Sorry. No, forget everything I just said then. I didn't know that that's what the number was. I thought it was 2 or 3.
Okay,
without,
okay.
Okay, got it. All right.
All right. Further comments from commissioners? All right, Barry, go ahead. And then I am going to make all of you say something. So just to let you know.
Do you want me to wait till you do that?
No, I do not want you to wait. You have your hand up. If you have
That's fine. No. So there's just an alternate thing I want to bring up, is that I think the turning to the cultural council on this instead of leaving it as kind of an amorphous source that we're going to somehow pull together is probably the better choice in my mind's eye. Because again, you have an entity out there, and if we're going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the Cultural Council, again, in my mind's eye, is front and center with that. And here you go again. I think if we look at us composited on a regional basis, there's the ability for them to be able to interact with other boards and commissions out there that are not part of it, and to do bigger scale things. So I see them kind of filling that DEI role, and then being able to do, to be able to network further out than just us on a local basis. And if you really do want to drop it to 11, I'd say keep the arts on, bring it back to 2 at large. And I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, having 2 environmental conservation entities out there, in my mind, I'm not I'm not really as thrilled with that as I'd like to be. And I think that it should be inherent upon us to make that decision of which one is probably the most important, out there. I'm going to argue, I think that maybe the land bank is, let's see where it goes. And you could certainly, again, have, the Conservation Commission come in either advisory or as time moves along, if we've not thought about it well, they could be included later. I will say up front that this is a good start, but I would never view this list 3, 5, 6 years down the road as a static list. Times change. We need to change with those times as well too. So I think that opportunity, we should explore that a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. That's actually a segue into a point that I want to make. Barry, could you put your hand down if you don't have another comment, please? So one of the things that is on my mind is the length and difficulty of the process that we go through to change enabling legislation. So my suggestion would be that as we write our update to that, if we're specifying the membership seats and so on, and if we end up with 13, great. But I would add a further sentence to that to say that the membership is authorized up to 15 to include these 13 seats and 2 other seats should they be deemed necessary in the future at the discretion of the NP and EDC. And that way, if we decide that we made a mistake by not including a particular sector, or we see an opportunity, or if some burning issue comes up and we don't have the right representation, we have the flexibility to respond to that need in something closer to real time, rather than having to wait a couple of years to go through this whole process through the state. So keep that in mind as an option. I think that might serve us well to have some flexibility built in. And so I'm going to, Nat.
Do you want to comment on that, or do you going to ask to take a decision or vote on
I'm
it?
throwing that out as further color on this discussion. So happy to have comments.
Okay, so I never heard this before. I like this idea. I just want to ask Leslie, is this something we have to get a little legal opinion on, or have we already done that? Because this makes sense if we can add 2 seats without adding them. I think that's what Mary is saying. It opens it up to where we could change the makeup without such a big process. Is that what you're saying, Mary? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I'm trying to build some flexibility into this.
I mean, it makes sense if it can be done through the state with one, change, and we have these 2 optional seats for the future without, having to go through quite this level of process. I think that makes sense if it's possible to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good thought.
Yeah, let's go to Joe. I'm assuming you're commenting on the same thought before we go to Leslie.
I am, but I think Leslie, if she has spoken to town council, I'd like to hear from her first.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Leslie.
So I did reach out to town council about this and did receive some advice that the legislation could be written in a way to provide for some flexibility. Personally, I'm not that crazy about his suggestions for how to do that, so I'd like to explore that further. The suggestions that he offered, which again, this was very preliminary, would be that authority could be granted to the select board to make appointments. And then the other option was that it could be done through a bylaw provision. So I think it's important for the commission to think about if, we're maintaining our independence as one of the regional planning agencies, subject to, our own enabling legislation outside of the town of Nantucket. Do we want to start commingling with town processes and procedures in terms of appointments and legislation?
Thank you, Leslie. Go back to Joe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, that was one of my recommendations, but I think after hearing town council's letter. I'm not really kind of in favor of that. I just think maybe we should get the structure laid out ourselves. I think this is really good. I think we've had great conversations about all parts. So I'm kind of happy with sticking with 13. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Barry, one more time to you.
Yep, thank you. I would echo Joe's sentiment at this point. I think we're best served by sticking with what we've got here at this point and not leaving two potential seats just floating out there from the future. Because I think you're going to run into a major public debacle as well, too, about, well, why hasn't the regional planning agency filled those two seats? What's, and the process unto itself, as Leslie said, I am not sure I'm ready to deal with that commingling aspect of things. I think when we get to the at-large thing, maybe that's where we can hammer that out and see where it brings us to. But I'm gonna say I'd rather see us be at either the 11 or 13 based upon the conversations we've had, and keep it there. And if we need to, we can go back and change legislation if we really need to in the future. But let's settle on something and be a little concrete here, and move ahead with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Megan, can you quickly, hopefully, produce a list now of what we've agreed to with 13 seats, and so we can put just that list back up on the screen without all the rest of the information?
Mary, you're a mind reader. That's actually what I was doing.
We did not coordinate that in advance, folks. So as soon as you're ready, Megan, that would be great. While we're waiting for Megan, Mike, thank you for joining us and sitting with us for over 2 hours through this discussion. I wanted to get your perspective, particularly on the transportation sector and the issue about how that should be represented. So if you would be kind enough to speak to us about that, please.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what anything everyone has said. I think I had the suggestion of perhaps inviting Mass DOT as ex officio, since Risha and we've had other District 5 staff express interest about attending the meetings just to listen in on the debates. But I don't know if that's something that it's necessary. I did kind of like the idea of perhaps if you were looking to grow the committee, having representatives from the Airport Commission, Steamship Authority, and the rest of it. But this is something that I could always just give reports on and serve as a liaison to those other industries in order to I don't know how to say it, lessen the burden of participation on other committees. So.
Great, thanks, Mike. And I want to make a point. I prefer to have supportive staff be the way that we refer to people who are employees. I think it gets very confusing if you try and label a staff person an ex officio non-voting member. I think staff covers that without getting extra language in there. And it starts to get blurry about lines of authority when you're presuming that staff members are also members of the commission. So I'd prefer just to keep that at staff. Barry?
Yeah, I just say, sometimes staff is allowed to have voting privileges with things. I think we just want to be clear as we move into that direction, that they aren't part of the general list, and there's somehow memorialized in there that they do not have voting privileges on it. They're strictly advisory to us.
Well, I'd say that's the definition of staff. I mean, that's why I don't want to put colorful language around it to make them ex officio non-voting members of the commission when they're performing the exact same duties as they are as staff.
I think I probably turn to Leslie to figure out what that final iteration looks like. I think she's heard our concerns, but here we go. Thank you.
Okay, so Megan, thank you. So we have under staff, we had also mentioned the DEI director as being a closer liaison. and potentially the sustainability programs manager to address the sustainability. So setting that aside for a second. So we have 13 listed. So I'm going to ask each commissioner, I'm just going to go down the list. Looking at that list, that is our proposed membership. Any comments, concerns, any final things you want to say about that membership proposal? Seth gets to go first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know this is trying to be a quick email, but I think adding in what the designee statuses is important. So housing authority or designee. And then I don't know if we decided on any other ones like social services. We sort of talked about Council for Human Services or designee.
Yeah, you're getting ahead of me, Seth. I understand that this is important and we want to do this. I'm just looking so far again, membership. Are these the members that we all agree that we want? I mean, I don't think we want to go and take a hand count vote, but I want to get people's thoughts to say, yes, this is what we've agreed on tonight. I don't want to presume that, that everybody is on board with 3 at-large members, because not everybody's spoken extensively about each of these categories. So this is your final thoughts on this list as a membership list, not looking at who the appointing authority is, not looking at the mechanism, just the membership. So we can have that solid.
I think it represents the overall sectors of membership that I would like to see.
Thank you, Seth. Christy?
I agree. I think that this covers, it's been a really great conversation so far, and I think the support of staff will help liaison some of the areas that we want to have a focus on without having an additional member join the commission.
Thank you, Christy. Dawn? Dawn, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I have another obligation to go to. I was just going to what was the what was the question? I had to walk out of the room.
Looking at the list of 13 members on the screen, do you agree that that is our final list, or do you have any further thoughts?
If I was going to make it down to 11, I would probably combine Land Bank and Conservation Commission and remove either one planning board or one at large. But if we're sticking with 13, then I think that it's appropriate.
Right. Thank you, Dawn. Wendy?
Yeah, I agree that it's been a great conversation. So I'm happy where we're landing so far, knowing that we're going to have the staff reports and maybe a little other ways to tackle some things that we're interested in. Thank you.
Thank you. Nat?
It's awesome. Love it. Great conversation. This is good. And all the small language, I'm sure that'll all come out good. This is a good draft, a good start to the end. So thank you.
Thank you, Nat. Barry?
Thanks. I'm gonna probably be close to where Dawn is at this point. I think 11 is a little bit more functional, and reduce it down to 2 at large, and either have this and us as a board to determine whether it's going to be either Land Bank Conservation Commission. The final thing I'd like to see is on these broad base sector things. I am so unclear how that's going to work. I'm going to keep referring back to we can't be dealing with these areas as amorphous entities that's going to be select at random. I think that it's inherent upon this board to make decisions about who we think would best fill that role and move from there. So maybe people need a little bit more time to do it, but I'm not willing to let those just slide off as some type of amorphous entity that's going to fill that sector, because I'm unclear what that all means in the end, and maybe further refinement from the commissioners here would help maybe deal with that.
Thank you, Barry. I agree with you, but we have the challenge that we haven't actually asked anybody whether they're interested in participating, and so that is going to be part of this. Dawn has her hand up, and I know she has to run, so I want to go to Dawn.
Oh, I just wanted to say I really agree with that too. I don't want to end up in a situation where we're trying to get something so specific that's not under an umbrella of like another committee of the town, that we don't have anyone that applies. And then we have a seat sitting empty where maybe someone else at large would have been able to fill it and contribute. So we just have to figure out exactly how we're going to do it and talk to some of the organizations that would fall under those. And it worries me a little bit if it's kind of a double, which, I mean, I guess we do already have that, like a double. They're appointed by the select board, and then they're appointed to NP and EDC as well. But that's how the Conservation Commission is right now. So just something.
Thank you, Don. Joe is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this has been great. I think we've checked a lot of boxes, but I do think there's a little more vetting out we need to do. So I think that we can, reach out to some of these organizations and see if they're willing to go forward. But I agree with what Don just said. A lot of these people are appointed, and would they want to swing on? And I know, as being on the Concom or being on the planning board, being asked to be on CPC or NPDC or anything, I think was a huge honor. So I don't imagine too many people are going to say no, but I definitely think we should do the asks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Joe. John?
Yeah, I think this is a great workshop practice. I wish we would have done this months ago. I appreciated all the time and the survey that Barry and Seth and the input that you all put into it. I think we really took what all the different questions we had about different sectors and narrowed it down to I think a great list. And when you look at all the surveys, and you'll see I did not put a survey in, and it wasn't because I didn't do it. I apologize. I had a computer issue that was stuck in an outbox. But that being said, I think if you look at all those, how it worked out, most of the people averaged out to about 13. So we're not really doing any more or less than what most of them averaged out to anyway, by blindly picking those different sectors and boards and committees. So I think this is a great first of what I think is 3, and the next is getting to a point where, now that we've picked these boards and sectors, and how do we determine if they're appointed or elected? And then obviously, not to put the cart before the horse, but we have to contact some of these groups and boards and see if they would want to participate. And I copy what Joe was saying. In all the different boards and committees, has been an honor. So I would guess that there would be a lot of interest in and almost flattery to be asked. So I think this is a great meeting, and I'm very happy with the list. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, so I think our next step tonight, it is 2.5 hours into the meeting. I'm sensitive to the amount of time and the few remaining brain cells that I have. Before we go, I would like to flesh out this list a little bit with what we've discussed as either the further clarification on where these seats are being filled from, or if we don't have that, then the next step to figure out where these seats will be filled from, whether it's asking a particular entity or talking to town council or whatever that next step may be. I would like to get, either an indication or a question recorded here before we break for the night. That said, if anybody really wants to keep working for another hour or two, say so. I didn't think so. Leslie? And I want to note that Don left about 6:45.
Exactly where I was going. I had a couple of notes that weren't on the list that, I think should be added if they're consistent with what you discussed, which I think they are. On the housing one, maybe just in paren after that, include housing authority or their designee. So people, we're going to send this out. I think people sort of forget what happens sometimes a few days after the meeting, just to, remind people of our discussions. And then for the arts and culture, I had a question mark by that, but I wrote down cultural council question mark. I think you all talked about that a little bit. And then for the social elder youth category, which I think she has listed as social services, I just had one, but who to be determined. So I didn't get any clear direction on that one.
Yeah, I think we need advice from the Director of Health and Human Services about how to move forward, because we already have a relationship with one part of that. And we're talking about adding a relationship with another part. And so Jericho is probably the one to give us the best advice.
Okay.
So going up to the top of the list, the chamber, we were going to, I think, ask the Chamber of Commerce what their recommendation is for how to select a person, whether it is a staff member designee or it's a board member designee or it's some other kind of designee. We need to go to the chamber and first make sure that they are interested, and then figure out what opportunity they can offer. And I'll wait for Megan to get that recorded. Barry, I'm going to have you hold all your comments to the end. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I really like the idea of using this designee model when a existing government board already exists. So I think for the housing authority designee makes sense. And I think one way, I'm fine with talking to Jericho about social services, but I think one way to get around the issue with the potential conflicting interests with the Council for Human Services is that the person representing social services is not actually a member of the Council for Human Services. They just apply to the Council for Human Services and they pick them on behalf of the MP and EDC. So instead of or their designee, it would be just their designee. And then I think the Cultural Council is the best way to do that with arts and culture as well.
Okay. Any comments to that suggestion by Seth? That sound good to everyone? Okay. So going back to the list, Megan, do you want to update the Cultural Council to say application through the Cultural Council as a potential? And again, we have to talk to them and find out what they can offer and what their interest is. County Commissioners is already established, so there's no further next step for that. Land Bank, we want to reach out to them and find out, is it staff or is it the commission? Concom is already established. Planning Board and 3 at large are already established. Are there any further actions that we need to take or any further notes on these positions? And Barry, we'll go to you. Barry, you're muted.
Yeah, I know. I see that at this point. I'm going to disagree with some fundamental things here at this point. I think asking these entities if they're interested are great, but I'm not ready to proceed with them telling us what their thought process is in terms of doing that. You can preclude what you're thinking about, but I think, as one member of this commission, I'd like to begin to define what that begins to look like from our end as well, and not be held to what they think is the mechanism under which to do it. I think it's important for us to have that discussion. Just like with the planning board thing, you're going to have that discussion about how do we get to the 3.
That's a good note, actually. Let's put that on the planning board, is they need a selection method.
Right, but I probably, I can make things easy for you. I think all 5 planning board members are in agreement with that, with just the idea that there's 3 planning board members. And I think anyone would be willing to serve. Is that, I don't want to put
Well,
words in your mouth.
that's really a planning board's discussion. But maybe I need to clarify a little bit. These notes are our next steps. They're not final steps.
Okay.
So for instance, we had the email from Mary Bergman, which was in the packet, about nonprofits. And so if we were asking a nonprofit, potentially, let's use the Chamber of Commerce as an example, to serve, they might have an interest, but they might not be willing to add that responsibility to a staff member. And even though we might want or prefer a staff member, they might not be willing to do that. I can't speak for them. I have no idea. So we need to know, and what I was very intentional in my language, what can they offer us in the process? We're not asking them to tell us how to proceed. It's a dialogue.
Mm-hmm. It was, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was coming across that way, just listening to a few of you, that they were going to dictate the parameters under which they would bring someone onto the NP and EDC. And I think that's,
no.
I'm not ready to go there yet.
Oh, I agree with you.
I think we need to have that discussion as well. And I think that's a discussion for one of our next meetings.
Yeah. Okay. Further thoughts from commissioners on any of these items before we call it a night? Seth?
Just really quickly, since we are making notes here in the parentheses in the at-large, can we reference the note to create policy for diverse representation?
Thank you for the reminder, Seth. Yes. Any further comments from commissioners? All right, last chance before Megan hits send on that email. If there are no further comments, we have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Matt. I got a second from Barry. Roll call vote. Seth Engelberg.
Aye.
I think Christy Frantella has already dropped off. Don Holgate has dropped off. Wendy Hudson.
Aye.
Nat Lowell.
Aye.
Barry Rector.
Aye.
Joe Topham.
Aye.
Don Trudell.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you all very much for the 2 meetings worth of
As
discussion.
well, Mary.
Oh, Dave, sorry. Did I hear from you at all tonight, Dave?
I was very quiet, but I think we did a lot of good work tonight, and we still have.
Well, actually, we adjourned, Dave. So I'm sorry I didn't get to hear.
That's all right.
Wow.
All good. Hiding in my corner. Hiding in my corner.
Catch you next time, Dave.
Yeah.
See you guys.
Aye.
Thank
Good
you.
all. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.